welcome to Found in Translation, a weekly-ish exploration of one fellow's translation of the Christian scriptures, one chapter at a time. I'm Brandon Rhodes, and across the internet for me is the translator himself, Brandon Johnson. Hey, Brandon.
Brandon.
Boy, we're barely holding our giggles in.
Yes, this is quite a morning we're having.
Yeah, we're both a little sleep delirious, and also Zelda Tears of the Kingdom delirious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which those may be correlated.
Indeed. I'm not in a position to confirm or disconfirm those rumors. What I am in a position to do is get us talking about the epistle to the Hebrews, or I suppose rather continue talking about it. So we are going to be covering chapter 2 this week, where this weird arcane discourse is going to continue to get stranger and more peculiar, but I think our job is going to be to help not just make it more legible, but hopefully more liberating and healing. This is a chapter that has quite a few odd, or I guess problematic translations, and the ways that those translations live in the vernacular of particularly evangelical circles has been a challenge. So this has also been a good opportunity to find a better way forward. So if you haven't had a chance to read Brandon's translation, for those of you watching, it's going to be up on the screen soon. And for those of you listening, it's always good to read his translation. And if you can, also get those footnotes. There's a link to it in the episode notes. So go ahead, hit pause if you need to, and give it a read. We'll be here. Hey everybody, welcome back. Let's jump into this. We're in chapter 2 of Hebrews. Got it up on the screen now. And there's quite a few translation shifts that are pretty consequential in verses 2 through 4. So, Brandon, would you be able to read that to us?
Yeah. If the message that was spoken through messengers came to be stable, and if every sidestep and refusal to listen has received its just restitution, then how will we get out of it while ignoring such a widespread liberation, which has been received beginning when it was spoken by the Lord and confirmed for us by those who listened to him, by God who joined with them in providing evidence with both signs and wonders, as well as various powerful acts specifically distributed by the sacred life breath based on God's intent.
The word
of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Yeah.
We just did a Spider-Man thing. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. My translation here is a bit of a mouthful. So it might be worth using out, like, what did we just hear? So.
Yeah, there are a couple points there where it's a bit mouthfully, and it's also really a weird line of argument that wasn't doing you any favors.
Sure.
When we talked about this episode a couple of weeks ago in preparation for like what are the big points we want to hit for each episode, I remember it took us like a while for me to make any coherent blipping sense of like, I understand what each of these words mean, but like it's the logic of it is really strange. Like if the message that was spoken to you from messengers or angels or whatever came to like be stable, and if every sidestep and refusal to listen has received its just restitution, then how are we going to get out of it? Like, wait, what's the get out of it? While ignoring such a wide, what did the angels part have to do with this? But it's been received since the beginning. It was spoken by the Lord and confirmed. Okay, like it's a long run-on sentence, but two, I don't understand what
all that was one sentence.
The messenger thing has anything to do with it, and so like what sense do you make of this? How do you?
Yeah. So it was talking about messengers in chapter 1. So it's basically like, so if what you heard from those messengers, the message that was spoken through messengers, um, if that has become like thoroughly established, like it has become realized, it's taken root and been made real. Um, point one.
Right.
And if all the problematic things that exist, the sidesteps and refusals to listen, have received their just restitution.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things together, if the message is fully established, the restitution has been like enacted, then how will we get out of it? And I think that's going back to the restitution. So like Hebrew Bible, a lot of the like penalties for wronging someone else, like the example I always come back to is like if you steal someone's cow, you owe them back 5 cows to make it right. And that's the restitution. That's the obligation that you owe in order to fully make it right again. So how are we getting it out of owing the restitution that's been established for the wrongs that we've done toward people? Um, how do we get out of it if we ignore the widespread liberation? Makes me think of that the Matthew 5, the Matthew parable about the enslaved workers, where one is forgiven this like $1 billion debt and then refuses to let go of the like $100 debt his fellow enslaved worker owes him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so if we're ignoring the liberation that is involving forgiving our debts to one another,
Yes.
how are we supposed to actually receive the message? Because that's what the message is about. Um, that's the kind of the basic logic of these that verse there. I think those two verses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's, I think I'm getting it now. Yeah. Um, it's just there's so many clauses to it that it's confusing. So maybe as we dive into
Mm-hmm.
a couple of these translation changes, it'll help me at least make better sense of it. So where do I want to start? Restitution.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty consequential one. And
Yeah.
refusal to listen has received its just restitution. What's usually what do the other translations have there?
Uh, penalty, sometimes even retribution. Um, yeah, basically things that make it about punishment. Um,
Punishment. Yeah.
and that's not the right word, like the right sense of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's about like it could even be translated as reparations. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah,
So
it literally means like payment of wages due. So that's using like what you owe to pay
mm-hmm.
because and so it's that sense of back to the Hebrew Bible, like if you've wronged someone, you owe them, make it right.
Mm-hmm. It's not
And
like
so the point is not that you did something wrong and you deserve to suffer. It's you wronged someone and you owe them making it right.
yeah, painful or costly consequences for wrong behavior, for wronging someone, for rupturing a relationship. Painful and costly consequences
Mm-hmm.
are different than punishment.
What is my computer doing here?
It's really excited to show us your file structure. There we go.
Yes.
um, I'll say that again. Painful and costly consequences for rupturing relationship is different from punishments. Like something is owed you. The way And I just hear the people living downstream from Calvin saying, aha, yes, but in Romans, the wages of sin, the wages you are owed is death. Why is it that, I mean, it's so strange to me. The Greek, you're saying the Greek doesn't even indicate punishment. It's just what's
No.
owed to you. So are we reading it
Or
in?
what's owed. It doesn't specify to whom. So it's, in this case, it's not what's owed to the wrongdoer. It's what the wrongdoer owes to the one who was wrong.
Oh shit. That's pretty clear. Yeah, like just restitution is something that is brought. Well, but here the grammar of it, and refusal to listen has received its just restitution.
Mm-hmm. I take that as like if each sidestep and refusal to listen has been assigned what restitution is appropriate for it.
Yeah, yeah. So expand a little bit on why like punishment languages. I mean, besides it just not necessarily being in the Greek,
Mm-hmm.
what's
Yeah, I mean, it's just not, retribution is not really a biblical concept. Um, and this is that insight is coming all the way back from my very traditional, very conservative Pentecostal undergraduate program where I took a elective on Exodus,
mm,
and the professor was very much pointing out like this is about restitutionary justice, not retributive justice.
right?
It's all about making it right for those who have been wrong, not the focus being on punishing the one who did the wrong.
Absolutely. And yet we have this, yeah, like I said, particularly because of Calvin, but I think broadly more domination infused modes of Christianity. They tell the story as an authoritarian, you broke an authoritarian's rules and you need punishment for that. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
punishment, escape from punishment paradigm for what the core story
Yeah,
of humanity, God, and the cosmos is about,
right.
which
Well,
is
that's
just,
another change that I made is the shift from escape to get out of it. It's like get out of the obligation
mm,
to pay off every penny of what I owe
yes.
versus escape the punishment that's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. God's going to make it all right. All things will find their balance.
Yeah. Yeah. Christ pays the debt on our behalf so that we aren't just forever burdened with an impossible debt.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. If you've been wronged, there's a sense in which Christ makes things right for you in the grind, I guess. And for me, that's what I need, like some
Well,
sense of afterlife to make sense of. But
it's the great jubilee. Like we're all just going to start from zero again in a way that makes sure everyone has what they need. It's the great redistribution of wealth,
yeah,
um, where it's like, okay, this has become untenable. Let's start over. Everybody got what they need. Great. Let's start from here now.
yeah. And you're gonna dick it up in the for the next 50 years. Like
Right.
you're gonna keep
And that
hoarding
was,
wealth, but we're gonna
yeah,
have this reset button.
every 50 years, it's going to reset. That was the intention in Leviticus. Um, and this is the whole Christian Testament is pointing toward we're going to do this in a way that sticks so that we don't have to keep doing it over and over, which starts to sound familiar about the priestly
Yes.
language
Yes.
later in Hebrews. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, even in the Jubilee is not necessarily there to punish those who
No,
hoarded and
it
accumulated
can be
unjustly.
painful for those who are have been doing the hoarding.
Yeah.
Um, but it's not the point is to make them suffer. It's
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're, of course, if you've got 100 acres and you have to go back to having 10,
Mm-hmm,
you're gonna have a part in you that really is gonna feel like that hurts. It's actually
mm-hmm.
saving your soul
Yeah. Yeah. If there
because
are 10
all of that
families.
accumulation alienates you. And it's, I mean, even in the example
Mm-hmm,
of land, is it Isaiah who says, woe to you who um, combine field with field and take up all the houses until you are living alone in the land.
mm.
Like the prophets
That's wow.
saw plainly that um hoarding land claims to land um is fundamental to dysfunction and injustice in society, and it also is its own kind of punishment to the soul life of the hoarders, of the rich, of the powerful.
Mm-hmm.
There is a poverty and alienation that deepens the more you have of land.
That reminds me of C.S. Lewis's The Great Divorce.
Yes. Yeah. The hell
Yeah.
in the Great Divorce is suburbia. Like houses
Yeah.
that spread further and further away from each other.
Right. It's because they get so irritated by their neighbors that they like want more space, and they can make whatever you want with your mind there. And so the
Yeah.
punishment is not to make you suffer, it's to give you whatever you want in the blink of an eye.
Mm-hmm.
And people keep choosing more and more opulent palaces farther and farther away from people and end up alone for eternity by their own choice.
It's remarkable. It's remarkable. So yeah, that
Yeah.
Jubilee logic, when you hear translations that are using punishment paradigms, try swapping in restitution and see if that logic of restitution and Jubilee, not punishment, and punitive, like restorative, not punitive justice, right? Swap that
Mm-hmm.
in. Um, use a pencil if you need to on your Bible and just see what logic you can find there. Because I think if you scratch at it, you'll find Jubilee gives us a vision of human destiny that it looks a lot more like Jesus and a lot less like an abuser. Which
Yeah.
which brings us to like, so yeah, this next phrase, such a widespread liberation. You can't join the
Mm-hmm.
Jubilee if you're ignoring the widespread liberation.
Yeah. The liberation for everybody,
Everybody, including
not
the
just,
land.
yeah. 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 And the animals and everything.
Yeah, exactly. And many livestock
Yeah.
as well. I think that's in Jude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there in Leviticus 25 too.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh,
Um, but yeah, widespread liberation, such a widespread liberation here I have instead of the traditional so great is salvation.
mm-hmm.
Um, widespread being like the word that's translated as great literally means like big. Um, and in English, great originally meant big, but has come to mean like really good.
Yeah.
And that's not what it's talking about. It's bigness, expansiveness.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Yeah, that definitely is another notch for never, you can't underestimate the scale of God's love's ambition, right?
Hmm.
Like the liberation is always going to be just a bit bigger than how big you think it could be. And then keep going and you're going to find it's
Mhm.
even bigger and it's even bigger. Uh That makes way better sense than like with it. If you read the regular translation having punishment and then how great is salvation, there's this sense of like the inner logic of that world is you escaped hell and torment for forever. And how great and glorious is it that God isn't gonna torture you for forever? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how great
Yeah.
is salvation? It's like, well, it's
Yeah.
kind of
It's a
twisted.
very individualistic idea of salvation too.
Yeah,
It's like,
individualistic and authoritarian.
yep, I deserve punishment as an individual because of the wrongs that I've done to God.
Right. The rules I broke.
Um, yeah, the rules I broke. So how am I going to escape that punishment if I ignore that Jesus wants to save me
Mm-hmm.
as an
Mm-hmm.
individual? And it's like, wait a minute, no, no, no. This is about how will I receive the forgiveness of my debt to the people that I have wronged to make it right for them because I have wronged them. If I'm ignoring the fact that this liberation, this forgiveness of debt is for everybody. And
Yeah.
so if I'm still holding things against the people who have wronged me and requiring them that they pay back their debt to me,
Yes.
I'm ignoring that the fact that this jubilee is for everybody. How am I supposed to actually benefit from it? If I'm excluding other people from it, I'm excluding myself from it.
Yes. Yeah. And so catch this to make sense of the whole thing here. If the message that was spoken through messengers, which to go back to chapter 1 is um, everything that mediates what you've received and along your wisdom path, whether it's angels or other people or scriptures, like which is what the rest of this book, a good chunk of it's going to be about, is like the deeper base note is Jesus, is the Christ, right? Um, all of it is penultimate. None of those things ultimately get us to being a Jubilee people.
Mm-hmm.
Or So if you want to get that full Jubilee liberation, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. Is
Mm-hmm.
one of the central arguments of this book, is like he
Mm-hmm.
is the one that will make sense of the discord and rupturing that will happen from all these if you think these other things are ultimate instead of penultimate. So if the message that was spoken through the messengers, like if you find that everything that brought you towards Christ, if you recognize that they can ultimately enslave you, then you're going
Mm-hmm.
to keep missing out on the full width and scale, how wide this liberation is. And this is in the context of written to primarily um, Jewish followers of Jesus, in a context where they are quickly being outscaled by Gentile followers of Jesus, right? So look at where the rest
Mm-hmm.
of the paragraph goes, which is, and if you doubt that Christ is beyond Torah or any of these institutions, the priesthood, whatever, um, look and see how like signs and wonders is the language being used here, um, confirms that it actually is among the Gentiles too. The widespreadness of God's work is beyond those whose tradition included using temple and Torah to get there. Like they have
Yeah.
their other mediating things that they need to find. Christ is bigger than.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways in the signs and wonders um we'll see includes actually figuring out how to live at peace with one another. It may well include, I'm going to use a mildly pejorative phrase here, but magic tricks. um but
Mm-hmm.
uh a lot of times it's easier for me to believe that a bone can be healed or the lame can walk than that rich and poor can live together in peace, or that the rich can give up their riches. or that white Americans are going to be able to like recognize that beloved community includes Black people and indigenous folk, or that straight people will welcome queer folk and recognize how wide God's liberation really is. It's easier for the real miracle is us to live in unity across these distinctions that have become divisions. Maybe the other magic tricks too, but my mind is blown when we can overcome these hostilities or join in Christ's overcoming of them.
Yep. Yeah.
That was a rant.
It was a good one. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's I'm just still struggling
paragraph?
to make sense of this damn this paragraph.
Yeah. I think that's my fault. Let's maybe we'll
no, it's
the next edition of this will be
also just Bible is weird.
Yeah. It's counterintuitive, like on purpose, but
yeah. Yeah, that is a funny detail, is that the early Christians seemed to intentionally choose counterintuitive ways of getting to points because the gospel itself is counterintuitive. Subverts convention so strongly. It's like, could you guys just lay off that little hat trick a little bit and speak plainly? Like, I get you have to wrestle for the blessing, but can it also just like, can I just take my order and go?
Maybe calm down a little bit, Priscilla.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, please, ma'am. Let's jump to what do we got in verse 5 here? This is a strange word, but once we got talking about it, I was like, no, we have to include this. It's not just a translation shift. There's some. Once I learned what it was replacing, and that's the word coordinate.
Yeah. You see, he did not coordinate the coming world that we are talking about under messengers. We'll talk more about.
Yeah, and on she goes.
Yeah. You see, he did not mix the coming world subject to the messengers. Make it subordinate. Make it submit.
So the other translations use subjugation language.
Right.
He did not subject the coming world. And then later on in verse 8, you coordinated everything under his feet. Since with the coordination of everything under him, he left nothing uncoordinated by him. Conventional translations tend to use hierarchy, domination, and subjugation language.
Yeah, and there is a sense of one is doing the coordination and others are following that coordination. But it's not about power over. It really comes from like military term of the general coordinating the troops in arranging them in the ranks, like on the battlefield. And it was interesting is like looking into this, learned that in Athens, where there was like a democratic, that's where democracy was born, the general was taking on that particular role, but didn't have an ongoing like inherent authority that was higher than everybody else. So it was really like the administrator. Okay, you stand there, you stand there, you stand there, and then instead of being like, okay, go and watching the battle, there was like left an empty space for himself and would go stand and like, okay, everybody, let's go together and move forward. Preparing for battle. And I think that's the kind of coordination we're talking about here. It's like, this is like how we can organize the way that things work, and I'm going to be in it with you. Not a submit to my and like standing
Right.
up on top of a throne somewhere watching the
Yeah,
lowly
raising a
peons.
flag over a pile of corpses. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
But
people
it, this,
like,
yeah, and this word shows up in household code passages like Ephesians 5 and
oh,
First Peter 3. It's the same word for like wives submit to your husbands,
mm-hmm,
or be in older translations be subject to your husbands.
mm-hmm.
Um, it's and the, but if you go back a couple of verses, it's everybody coordinate with each other. Be submitting with each other is the more traditional language.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you submit to each other if it's about hierarchy? That doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not about hierarchy. It's like help coordinate working together.
Yeah. Tend to the sacred fabric
Mm-hmm.
that includes both of your flourishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, coordinate is much better. It has its own like consequential, like it can sound a little um meticulous providence, I guess, like the sense of like God is court moving all of the secret pieces around, and there's ways of understanding the divine, how the divine
Mm-hmm.
relates to the world, that is comfortable with that. I'm more of an open and relational theology kind of guy, and so it makes me a little squirmy that God is like marionetting reality instead
Yeah.
of
It it's all metaphors and images to try to help us understand. It's if you take it too literally, then it starts to get really weird.
right, right. And that, boy, that's just a good refrain. That should be like on every page. Take a
Mm-hmm.
deep breath with some of this.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize how metaphor works. Great. Yeah, I
Yep.
love seeing a little bit of authoritarianism get sliced off of the translation decisions. Again, another example of where I can
Yeah.
understand how I see what they were doing of like, aha, military, authoritarian subjection language being used to describe the sacred work of the peaceable triune God, right? Like that whose inner life and working in the world is subversive to domination, power, and authority.
Yeah.
But they use those metaphors, and it gets a little weird. But so at least to soften the blow is helpful.
Hmm.
Uh, Thinking of meticulous control, uh, it's worth getting into uh, verse 9. There's one detail in there. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
go like 9 through 11 here.
Yeah. But even starting there and kind of bridging it to what we were just talking
Mm-hmm.
about, if we're talking about a meticulous providence, the marionette controlling God view,
Yeah.
then how do you explain verse 9 there? Like, we don't, or verse 8 leading into 9, we don't yet see everything coordinated under him. We don't. It's not like that yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but we see Jesus, who chapter 1 verse 1, it's like we've God has spoken through a son instead of the messengers now. First chapter 12, like you were referencing, let us fix our eyes on Jesus. Like that's what we're seeing right now, is we see Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and who is bestowed with the laurel wreath with renown and honor through fatal suffering, so that with God's generosity he would experience death for everyone's sake. It certainly sounds like the opposite of domination.
Right. Right. There's a sense that it's solidarity that brings some sense of authority. So, like it's not authoritarianism that gets you authority. or justifies it or expresses it. It's solidarity
Mhm.
is the deepest kind of authority, if you want to use that language, that is in this cosmos, is one that is cruciform here.
Mhm.
Is one of loving solidarity. Now, often here there's this sense of like he went through. It's so easy to just hear these passages through. He was punished for us. He was
Mhm.
fate, and so that with what is it usually you have, so that with God's generosity he would experience death for everyone's sake. It's usually so that by God's
By
grace,
God's grace, yeah, or by the grace of God,
yeah.
he would experience death for everybody,
So
as if
contrast
like it's
contrasts that.
yeah. The traditional, it's like God made Jesus suffer and die,
Mm,
and that was the expression of grace or unearned favor,
yes.
um, which is another more traditional way of translating the word here. But it's like I've talked about elsewhere. Charis is related to the same word as like gift
Mm-hmm.
and giving. It's the sense of generous giving, generosity. Um, that has nothing to do. It's not that like I've quoted this several times, but my pastor growing up defined grace and mercy as grace is receiving what you don't deserve, and mercy is not receiving what you do deserve. As if the
Ugh,
only thing that anyone you deserve no good things and you do deserve only bad things. Um,
that's from hell.
yeah, neither of those things have anything to do with the recipient. They're like about God being generous and compassionate. It has nothing to do with what's deserved. It's not
Yeah,
even part of the conversation.
yeah. Stop
Um,
shitting all over it. Yeah.
and so to have somehow this loving and restitution and
Mm.
for debt forgiving God being the way that to give people what they don't deserve is to murder his son. Like what?
A little weird. A
I
little
I
weird.
what?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't think this is actually talking about what God is doing directly in this verse. Um, it's the by God's grace. It's with God's grace, I think is a better translation.
Yeah.
By is possible. It's not a wrong translation, but I think the context, it's just not the best translation.
Yeah.
Um, Jesus is taking on for himself fatal suffering and doing that, enacting the same kind of generosity that God has. He's taking God's generosity into his own character and acting on it by being willing to experience death for everyone's sake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Suffering
So this, we're
isn't an
talking about
end. Yeah.
Jesus having and enacting God's generosity, not God doing this to Jesus by his grace.
Yeah. Like we're using that would be using the word grace or giftfulness or generosity to include God choosing, well, again, punitive. Like there is a sense in which God's grace includes um discomfort. Like we were saying, there's a mercy to be there, to join in God's work of making us more gentle, just, hospitable, tempered. To
Mm-hmm.
to like, so as a man recovering from patriarchy, right,
Mm-hmm.
is going to include discomfort. There is a costliness to my restitution, my liberation, for how that, or like as a landowner on occupied, on occupied land, there's a sense in which the fullness of my own faithfulness needs, hopefully will include the people who's were here first and the justice that they
Mm-hmm.
deserve. That's costly, but it's not pain or suffering as an end unto itself. That's
Right.
ancillary, and it's actually, to draw on our siblings in the Buddhist tradition, a sense in which your best self eventually realizes that the suffering that's happening there is an illusion.
Hmm.
Like it's your own fixations on domination that is kicking and screaming. And some more,
Right.
the more of the
Or
false
or
self.
even prioritizing your own safety over everything else. Like, which
Mm,
safety is a good thing.
yeah.
Um, like in the Buddhist tradition that you're talking about, it's that pain is real and inescapable. Bad things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Period. Suffering is a choice.
Ah, yes.
It's if I get hit in the face by somebody, like I can, like, that's going to hurt.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
My emotional response to that, of just being like pissed off that it happened, that's a choice. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where the suffering comes in. If I have chronic back pain, well, it hurts. If I'm mentally anguished about it and frustrated, that's going to lead to muscle tension and chronic heightened cortisol, which then leads to an increase in the pain. It literally increases my suffering, not just mentally, but physically. And that's what that insight from Buddhism is talking about.
Yeah.
At least within the individual, it then translates even larger within a community, right? But
Indeed. Indeed.
yeah.
Yeah. So these are subtle, but really, really, really consequential um distinctions that need to be made, given that we are inheritors of a tradition that has so easily been co-opted by um voices that are inclined to interpret punishment as redemptive, and do not have a language for the kind of discomfort that comes with getting yourself out of a domination system as a dominator. Their senses of discipleship, sanctification, salvation, redemption, liberation, whatever you want to call it, humanization, does not have language for these things other than calling it socialism. Um, but I'd say that's really at the center of discipleship to Jesus. And
Yeah.
and valorizing suffering is a way to preserve and justify domination, and leads to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
trauma and shame. I
Mm-hmm.
certainly went through a phase in my life where I kept on doing what I thought was faithful. I thought I was being a good member of, like, the body of Christ by continuing to go to certain religious activities that was activating trauma for me. And the story I told myself was that this is my cross to bear, that there is a holiness to my suffering for the sake of the body, the church. Mm, that really effed me up. It deepened the
Mm-hmm.
trauma. That was not redemptive. It was not salvific. It was not liberating or healing. And so, even if we get ourselves out of domination systems that are beyond ourself, it's important as we find our and cling to our own humanity that we also discern the ways in which these false valorizations of suffering and punishment have been internalized, and to be able to
Somehow
compassionately.
suffering is admirable for its own sake.
Yeah. Which is some crazy ass shit.
Yeah.
And it really hurt me. I hurt myself doing
Yeah.
that. Listeners,
Sometimes,
yeah.
Sometimes suffering can be a way, like in choosing to endure suffering for the sake of something, some other good you're achieving through the suffering can be worth it. And you make that kind of a choice.
Yes.
If
Absolutely.
If you can, right? Like it's as a gift to give, but not for the sake of like, well, I'm suffering, so I know I must be on the right path. It's like,
right.
wait, what? What does that even mean?
Yeah, that can really.
Well, Christ said we would suffer. Huh? Like as something inescapable, not as something to pursue for its own sake.
Yeah, I mean, similar to like, well, Jesus said that men would hate us. It's like, not because you're being a dick to trans people. That's
right.
just being a dick. The world is right to abhor dickish behavior.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you can't just say, if people are hating us, therefore it's validating our faithfulness.
That
It's like, well,
automatically
sometimes you're being
means we're
hateful.
doing well.
Yeah. It's like, no. Well, you gotta keep in mind, sometimes they're gonna hate you because you're standing with trans people. The world is gonna judge you and hate you for including trans people as fully welcome, holy, and worthy of dignity and justice. That's the world hating you. If they're saying, like judging you for being a monster to people or behaving monstrously, to use better moral grammar.
It reminds me of the saying I've seen online of I'd rather be excluded for who I include than included for who I exclude.
Yeah. I'd rather be in hell with Jesus than in heaven with the prick you worship. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, indeed. But I like your way more, a little. It's a little less provocative. Yeah. Okay, we should go on to
do we want to read the next few verses of that too to kind of wrap that up?
Yeah, hit it.
Yeah. So after that kind of first piece there that we've been talking about with the suffering that's enacting God's generosity, it was fitting for him, because of whom everything exists and through whom everything exists, to finish bringing many children to renown after beginning their liberation through his sufferings. But the one who designates for sacred purposes and the ones being designated for sacred purposes are all from one family. That's why he is not ashamed to call them family members.
Say more.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah. It's all connected to this sense of the suffering is not for its own sake, but it's in order to bring liberation for many, the widespread liberation. It's this big, expansive thing.
Right.
And there's really, the point is to make there not be any distinction between the one who designates for sacred purposes or makes holy and the ones being designated for sacred purposes or are being made holy. That's the traditional translation there. It'd be from one family. The Greek is just from one period.
Yeah.
And so every translation supplies another word here to try to make sense out of it. And from context of the next phrase,
Yeah.
not ashamed to call them family members. It's one family is what it's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's all about that inclusion, the unity, the solidarity being brought into being one cohesive group that have this sacred purpose of including more people. Like all the people who are included then take on the role of including others, like being willing to experience suffering for the sake of including people. It
Yeah.
just grows from there.
Reach.
It's like the point of this whole thing, that liberation that just keeps growing.
And that shift from making peace to be at the same table together versus like a punishment paradigm really becomes clear in a translation shift decision you made in verse 17. Can you scroll down to that?
Yeah.
So it reads, that's why he owed it to be made like the members of the family and everything, so that he could become a compassionately committed and faithful high priest and bring all of it to God. Here it is, to make peace regarding the deviations of the people. Now that's usually to atone for, which is
Mm-hmm.
not a bad
It's not
phrase,
incorrect. It's just
but that word atone means something else nowadays by the
mm-hmm.
loudest voices. So
Right.
getting out of the like to receive the punishment for.
It's like I am cleansed by my suffering. Like I
Yes.
am made okay by being punished.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus atoned for all of us by being punished. It's like, wait.
That's not it. That's not it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got was it to make peace with, or to?
Yeah, making peace with, the word means something like reconciliation,
Mm-hmm.
like uh was used in with other deities in the Greek world of like I have wronged that's God's followers or something like that. So now I need to make an offering to try to say sorry, like I didn't mean it. Like, are we good?
Yeah.
Like that kind of a reconciliation with that deity. Um, and that's what it is here. Like we're making peace with each other. We're coming to terms with each other. We're reconciling.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
that's the meaning of this. Not something has to die to sate the bloodlust of the angry god.
Right. Right. Oh, that's good. That's a big improvement over invoking what has become shorthand for um toxic suffering.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
for lack of a better phrase, I guess. Then the last thing I
Mm-hmm.
want to I want to fist bump you for here is fist bump through the screen. Um, we got to time it right, otherwise we're punching each other in the
Oh,
face. There we go. Okay.
there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, is verse 18. Since with what he
Yeah.
has suffered when going through trials, he can help those of us who are going through trials. It's usually
Yeah.
tempted or temptations, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Going, yeah, being tempted, going through temptations, uh, which is an interpretive leap, honestly. Like there's a sense of testing is
Mm-hmm.
what the word like literally means, like time trials of like running races, like that kind of a you're being tested to see how fast you can run. Even going to court in a trial, that word comes from the sense of the judge and jury are testing to see who whether the
Yes.
execution or the defense are telling the most believable story, like which we're testing this thing
Mm-hmm.
here. um That's where this words so trials often gets used through enduring hardships, and through that process testing whether you will remain faithful or not, or whether you just give up. So there's a temptation to give up, I suppose, but it's not just like, ooh, I want to sleep with someone that's not my spouse, so I'm going to do that. And I've been tempted, and now I sinned.
Right.
Dang it. It's, can you stay faithful to this message of jubilee and inclusion, debt forgiveness of social debts,
Mm-hmm.
um, even when we're made to suffer for it, for standing in solidarity with the oppressed against the dominators? Like, are you going to stay with it? And Jesus did, to the point of being murdered for it. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how he stood as a faithful high priest and made peace regarding the deviations of the people. It's like the people were deviating. The people, they were talking about the people who murdered him. Uh, and
Who lynched him? Yeah.
it's, yeah, it's it's that sense of going, being tested. I'm going to stay faithful even though it's really hard, even though it's
Yes.
really scary, even though there are going to be terrible consequences for staying faithful.
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
Being faithful to my sacred purposes that I've been designated for, which is to bring more people to be included in this jubilee way of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there are other parts to our formation and expansion and recovery of our own humanity, whatever you want to call it, that may include like choosing fidelity to a spouse. Sure, fine. May
And
include
sometimes
not
that's
having,
really hard.
yeah, sometimes it's hard. Or not having more ice cream or whatever, whatever it's gonna be. Like, I mean, I'm using that other end of the spectrum here just to say
Yeah.
temptation is used to mean that, and the language, however it's translated here, what the reason your translation is more helpful to me is exactly what you just did. Verse 18 is verse 8. There is also a verse 17 and 16 and 15. Like this is coming at
Mm-hmm.
it's in the context of Jesus saying, I'm choosing solidarity and getting lynched over it. This is the suffering and the trial that our Lord went
Mm-hmm. I
through.
mean, look at it, 15. Set free those who are subjected to enslavement throughout their lives by what? By fear of death. And Jesus chose to be faithful in the face of death to the point of actually experiencing it.
Yes. Yes. So to hear this passage in context makes it way harder to extract it into a sense of like all these other things. Like hear it first within
Mm-hmm.
this rhetorical flow.
Yeah.
Um,
I always heard it growing up as, you know how much you lust about girls?
that's it. Yeah.
Well, Jesus had the opportunity to lust too. He was tempted, but then didn't. And so he gets it. And he, like, it's not like you can't say, like, you don't understand me. No, he understands, and it's still not okay. So you should be ashamed.
That's right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There's so much power to the like hearing it within context, and then you hear the way it's used for purity culture, and it
Mm-hmm.
hurts. That there's a
Mm-hmm.
suffering there. There's a suffering to the trial of having to hear purity culture explain the Bible. Um, which is hopefully why you're listening to us, because we're hopefully less harmful than that.
We hope.
We hope. We do hope. We also hope that you'll stay tuned for another episode. We're going to keep working our way through Hebrews, but we got to wrap this one up now. So the easiest way to support Found in Translation is by leaving us a rating or a review on whatever platform you're enjoying this on, whether that's YouTube, Facebook, or whatever podcast player you're listening to. That helps other people find the show. The second best way to support the show is to become a sponsor. You can do that for just $5 a month. And when you do, you get comment access on the Translations Google Doc and the satisfaction that you're supporting exceptionally nerdy, independent media. You can find the link to join the community in the show notes. The music you're listening to is by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Found in Translation was produced by Perry FM on unceded Chinook and Kalapuya land. Goodbye, Brandon.
Bye, Brandon.
Bye, everybody.